You open the fridge and see 2 jars of white fat. Same color, same softness, same quiet presence on the shelf. Your brain labels them the same way it always does: fat. But one of them can turn a simple pie crust into delicate layers that shatter when you bite. The other can give fried potatoes a deep, savory flavor people still talk about decades later. Use the wrong one, and the recipe can be perfect on paper, yet feels strangely off on the plate. So what's really going on here? If both come from animals, why do they behave so differently? Today isn't about nostalgia or health trends. It's about understanding a difference you can taste but rarely name, and learning a 5-second rule that tells you which fat belongs where, every time. Let's get into it right here on Secrets of Simple Things. When cooking fat came from the backyard. For most of human history, cooking oil didn't come in bottles. It came from animals people raised, butchered, and relied on. Fat wasn't a specialty ingredient. It was fuel, for cooking, for preservation, for long days of labor. In that world, tallow and lard weren't alternatives. They were defaults. If you lived among cattle, you cooked with tallow. If you raised pigs, lard filled your kitchen. These fats shaped everyday meals long before vegetable oils existed, and they quietly built the textures and flavors we now call traditional. Today, both are returning to modern kitchens, not as curiosities, but as tools. People notice that fries taste different, pastries behave differently. Something familiar but forgotten is happening again. To understand why, we have to stop calling them both animal fat and start with a simpler question: which animal did it come from? The first split. Not just fat, but the animal behind it. Tallow and lard are made the same way, but they do not begin the same way. Tallow is rendered fat from beef or sheep. Lard is rendered fat from pigs. Rendering is a slow, patient process. Raw fat is gently heated until pure fat separates from connective tissue and impurities. What remains is shelf-stable, concentrated energy, quiet, practical, and deeply tied to the animal it came from. That origin matters more than most people realize. Cattle and pigs eat differently. They store fat differently. And those biological differences shape everything that follows: texture, melting point, flavor, and how the fat behaves in a pan or a bowl of dough. This is why entire cuisines once leaned naturally toward one fat or the other. Kitchens reflected farms, and farms reflected landscapes. From this single difference, cow versus pig, every other distinction begins to unfold. The touch test. One stays firm, one stays soft. You don't need charts to see the difference. Just leave both fats on the counter. Tallow tends to stay firm at room temperature, almost waxy, holding its shape even in a cool kitchen. Lard is softer and more spreadable, especially when it comes from the pig's kidney fat, known as leaf lard, prized for its smooth texture and clean character. This isn't just a tactile detail. Firmness hints at structure. It tells you how the fat will melt, how it will mix, and how it will respond to heat. A fat that stays solid longer behaves differently than one that relaxes early. Your hands notice this before your mind does. And once you've felt it, you start to anticipate what will happen next, on the stove or inside a ball of dough. Flavor. One speaks, one disappears. Texture is only half the story. Flavor finishes the sentence. Tallow carries a noticeable savory depth, especially when it isn't heavily refined. There's a quiet beefiness that comes through in roasted vegetables or fried foods. It doesn't hide. It announces itself. Lard, when rendered carefully, does the opposite. High-quality lard is mild and surprisingly neutral. In many dishes it seems to vanish, leaving texture behind without pulling attention to itself. That quality made it invaluable in baking, where flavors should support, not interrupt. A simple way to remember it is this: tallow speaks, lard disappears. One adds a backbone, the other steps aside. And that difference becomes unmistakable once heat enters the picture. Heat, where the pan tells the truth. Tallow is built for heat. Its structure makes it stable when temperatures climb, which is why it has long been favored for deep frying and hard searing. It holds together when pans get loud, when oil shimmers and surfaces demand resilience. This is one reason traditional fries, cooked in beef tallow, developed a reputation that still lingers. The fat didn't just cook the potatoes, it shaped their flavor and aroma in a way that modern substitutions rarely replicate. Lard can handle heat too, but it's more comfortable at moderate temperatures. Its strength isn't endurance at extremes, it's balance. On a stove used for everyday cooking, it performs quietly and well, without insisting on attention. Once you understand this, the old choices stop feeling mysterious. They feel practical. Different fats, chosen for different kinds of fire. Dough. Why lard creates flake and tenderness. If heat is where tallow shines, dough is where lard reveals its gift. Baking isn't about resistance, it's about architecture. Fat needs to blend into flour, create pockets, and melt at just the right moment. Lard's softness allows it to coat flour gently, forming layers that separate as they bake. The result is flake, tenderness, and a texture that feels almost engineered, though it was discovered long before anyone used that word in kitchens. Leaf lard became especially prized for this reason. Neutral in flavor and smooth in structure, it lets dough do what dough is meant to do without interference. Tallow can work in dough, but it behaves differently. Its firmness resists blending, and the results are often heavier. Not wrong, just different. In baking, small physical differences create dramatic sensory ones. Nutrition. Similar foundations, subtle differences. Nutritionally, tallow and lard share a common foundation. Both are pure fat, high in calories, with no carbohydrates or protein. When rendered properly, neither contains trans fats. The differences lie in the details. Tallow generally contains a higher proportion of saturated fat and can provide fat-soluble vitamins like A, D, E, and K, especially when sourced from grass-fed animals. Lard tends to contain more monounsaturated fat, similar in balance to olive oil, and can offer small amounts of vitamin D when pigs are pasture-raised. Neither fat is inherently good or bad. They simply behave differently, both in the body and in the kitchen. Nutrition doesn't choose for you. Your goals do. Beyond food, one lit rooms, one fed homes. The story doesn't end at the table. Because tallow stays firm and keeps well, it once lit rooms as candles, cleaned homes as soap, and reduced friction as early lubricant. It was an industrial material before industry had a name. Lard stayed closer to the hearth. It shaped family cooking across Europe, China, and the Americas, folded into pastries, tortillas, and preserved meats. Cultural and religious traditions reinforced these paths, guiding which fats were welcomed and which were avoided. These patterns still echo today. Preferences we think are personal often trace back to geography, belief, and necessity. The 5-second rule. Choose the right fat instantly. Here's the rule you can use without thinking. Heat wants tallow. Dough wants lard. If your pan is screaming hot, searing, deep frying, building crisp edges, reach for tallow. If you want flake, tenderness, or neutrality, pie crusts, biscuits, tortillas, choose lard, ideally leaf lard. Remember the shortcut. Tallow speaks. Lard disappears. Fries point to tallow. Pastry points to lard. Everyday cooking can go either way, depending on the flavor you want to hear or not hear. A small lesson about how humans choose. Tallow versus lard isn't a competition, it's a record. A record of animals people raised, climates they lived in, and problems they needed to solve. Humans didn't choose the perfect fat. They chose what they had and learned to use it well. That's the quiet lesson hiding in these two white jars. Understanding them doesn't tell you what to eat. It simply gives you language for a choice you are already making. Sometimes the difference isn't in the ingredient itself, but in the life that produced it. And when you see that, cooking stops feeling like a set of rules and starts feeling like a conversation, with history, with place, and with the small practical wisdom passed down through ordinary kitchens. If this helped you taste the difference, share your favorite memory of cooking with tallow or lard in the comments. And if you enjoy discovering the quiet stories hidden in everyday ingredients, consider subscribing for the next small secret.